Let's jump to this next story because again, I think this all really comes together in interesting ways. From Post Millennial, Biden to cancel up to $10,000 in student loan debt, extend payment pause until December. And there's also going to be a $20,000 forgiveness, which I believe is additional if you received a Pell Grant. They say, in addition, Pell Grant recipients will see up to $20,000 of their debt canceled. I read somewhere that it was actually in addition to, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's 10 on top of 10 is what I learned.
Is that what it was?
I think so. That's what I was
someone wrote it was 20 on top of 10, and they may have been mistaken. It was like a mainstream publication or something. But anyway, this ain't it. They're not actually solving the problem of student loan debt. The predatory loan system will still exist. All he's basically doing is giving a tiny bribe to people to vote for him. But I think the bigger issue here that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, James, is universities, these schools, they are subsidized indoctrination machines. And now people are getting a freebie. So it's like they're continually subsidizing in more and more ways. They want it to be free.
Yeah.
Well, of course they want it to be free. I mean, anybody who's sharing a cult religion wants you to come and experience it. And if it costs money to support, they want someone else to pay for it so they can keep funneling people in without hindering themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you think about all this.
No, I mean, so this is, there's a whole thing we could get into if you want to about how universities back themselves or painted themselves into this financial corner they're in. But with the students, let me just take one step back and we'll come back into focus because it's going to hit both of the things we were just talking about or all of the things we've been talking about. The agenda behind much of leftist activism, if you read Marcuse says in another essay, it's called The Essay on Liberation in 1969, the first chapter of that, it's an essay, but it's like 170 pages long. So it's, back in the day, kids, we wrote real essays. They weren't 500 words. Sorry, op-eds. No, it's 170 pages. The first chapter of his essay on liberation is A Biological Foundation for Socialism. And what he explains is that if you want to get socialism, you have to change the level of people's vital needs. You have to change people in terms of what they need. Now, he has a footnote that says, I don't literally mean biology. So he's not literally advocating for eugenics. And every time he uses the word biological, it has quotes around it. So he means something different by it. And what I finally figured out was what he means by it is that you don't know how to live life without getting your way. In other words, psychopathology. Literally the definition of psychopathology. It interferes with your ability to engage in daily life. So every bit of leftist activism that's followed off of Marcuse, which is basically all of this radical left since the 1960s, has at the bottom the goal to create the activists who are going to not be able to figure out how to live their life without getting the policy change that they demand. So in this case, you give all these kids crazy amounts of student debt, and what do? They become agitators for student loan forgiveness and eventually free college because they want to have the free indoctrination program. And so hand in glove, the colleges become the indoctrination centers or actually the programming centers. They're more like Maoist thought reform prisons than they are like indoctrination. So you turn it into a thought reform prison and you get kids to demand that it be free because you put them in financial dire straits. Now with the trans issues, the same thing. Because what happens if you transition a child? Put them on puberty blockers, you cut them up, sterilize them, but what else? Do you know how expensive, you know how many drugs and how much medical care they have?
And you have to take them for an extremely long time.
For the rest of your life.
No, right.
So what are those people going to advocate for at a policy level? Socialized medicine. Because the medicine's so expensive and the system broke them and it's so expensive. So what you're doing, history uses people and then discards them. Sorry, trans activists, that's what you're doing. You're using these poor kids and you're going to discard them. Uses people and then discards them to get their policy agendas in place. And in this case, you're going to create an army of people, among other things, are politically moldable, etc. But you also are going to create an army of people who are going to advocate vigorously for the rest of their lives for socialized medicine. Just like these kids in college.
What's worrying to me about this is we talked about the detransitioner subreddit, where you have nearly 40,000 people and constant posts from people about how they're becoming suicidal because they were rushed into this and didn't want to do it.
Yeah, no kidding.
So my whole response to the whole thing is like, whether someone is trans or someone is not trans and being pressured, we better slow that thing down before people start taking their own lives.
Well, now you know one of the main reasons that they're doing, there are a few, but one of the main reasons that they're pushing it so hard is because they need that army of broken people who are going to be pharmaceutical patients for the rest of their life, who are going to have expensive medical treatments, who are going to ask for and beg for socialist medicine.
I kind of feel that's a bit a bit of a stretch. I think there's a lot of factors at play. There's industry standards.
There
there's
are
money to be made.
There's money to be made.
But
there's money to be made in the short term too, in the long term as well.
But I think a lot of these people, like if you look at the mothers who bring their kids to these shows, it's like you've got Munchausen by proxy. But then you have parents who are genuinely confused and don't know and think they're doing the right thing.
Sure, of course.
I think you'll find with most circumstances you have normal people being pulled in a direction.
Yes.
And it's a much smaller faction that are probably nefarious.
No, that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of, say, the so-called parents of trans kids, and I say that so-called because I don't believe such things as trans kids exist. There are people who've been pulled into this, as you were suggesting. But the parents, a lot of them were like...
I got to stop you there. I think that's factually incorrect. We talked about there's an article from a PhD professor who talks about endocrine disruptors and hormone disruptors, which masculinized the brains of female fetuses and then resulted in trans kids. I think.
How often is that?
Probably,
so maybe they do exist,
right? And that's
1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000.
Sure. I'm not saying it's 1 in 10. I'm just saying, for you to say you don't think they do exist. I think
I'll walk back to they're very rare.
Very rare. I agree with, and I think the challenge is. We have a system right now that doesn't discern between social and the actual.
Oh no, they're not even going to try. They're not even going to try.
It's just rushing kids into medical treatment, which is going to permanently alter. And for many of these kids, we're clearly seeing now at the detransition subreddit ruin their lives.
Yeah,
big mistake.
Because you dangle out, you tell them you have this huge problem. There's no real good solution to it. You're probably going to commit suicide if you don't get resolution to it. Here's this treatment here's this one path out. By the way, this is how they did Maoist thought reform, is they put people under outstanding psychological pressure with a limited set of choices for how to escape that pressure. And then they go into that, and then what happens is they get 4 or 5 years in, and then whoop, the rug's been pulled out from under them. They don't have any options to get out anymore. The underlying problem never got treated.
My question is, how much of this is an emergent phenomenon versus a directed phenomenon?
Oh, yeah. Lots of money goes into it, so there's some directedness to it. Some of it, though, this is what I was starting to say, a lot of these poor moms were kids in the 90s, right? And we all grew up, if we grew up in the 90s, we all grew up with this kind of like boogeyman of, it was real, but there's this, character that was really heavily portrayed as the evil, angry, there's almost always an angry dad who disowns their kids for being gay, right? And everybody's like, oh, that guy's terrible. So you have a whole bunch of people who grew up in the 90s who had this character as like the big evil guy to think of. Then they grow up and they're adults now and they have their children. So what are they going to be? Hyper inclusive as like an overreaction. Then you add in the Munchausens by proxy, which is where, if people don't know what Munchausens by proxy is, I know you guys do, but it's where you poison your kids so that they're like sick, and then you pick up the pity points, like, oh, my poor child.
So for people who aren't familiar, Munchausen's is when you feign being sick for attention, and by proxy is when you feign someone else being sick for attention.
Yeah, often they did like drip feed their kids poison and say, Sally's so sick, oh my gosh, help.
It's like Sixth Sense. The mom was poisoning the daughter and then going, my daughter's so sick. I think she just wanted to kill the daughter in that movie. But this is a really important point too that I think argues for a potential emergent phenomenon that we're seeing. I've talked about this. I said,
the boogeyman's grown up.
When I was little, we had all these signs everywhere about how racism was bad. And so all of these millennial kids around me grow up being told about how awful racism is. They have been trained to combat racism. The only problem is we've enacted a bunch of policies doing away with the institutional problems. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's done. I'm just saying for the most part, things are pretty good. Things have improved dramatically. And now you have these people who grew up on this seeking it out, but they can't find it.
Yeah.
So I refer to it as an autoimmune disorder.
Yeah, of course. Now, it's not really a question as to whether or not there are people who are taking advantage of this and these would be nefarious people. I just think they're relatively small in number who are pushing this. Usually with a lot of money behind it for whatever other ends they have. And if we might quote from the great philosophical epic, I guess, legend of Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. And they know that causing these points of damage creates opportunity. Now, I don't think there's terribly many of those people, relatively speaking. The proportion of them might be as small as 1 or 2%, which, by the way, matches the proportion of psychopaths in the underlying population.
I knew a bunch of people from Occupy Wall Street. I was down there for a while. And what I was told by some of the organizers, people with access to the resources who knew what was going on, had plans, and were controlling what was going on, they said, we want to flip the pyramid over. Sounds good, right? The pyramid, right? You got the elites on top, you got the bourgeoisie, you got the proletariat.
Yeah.
So it sounds like to the uneducated, to the unlearned, oh, you want to put the working people on top to give them control, right? That's what socialism wants.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not one of those people. I responded with, if you flip a pyramid over, it's going to topple into a pile of bricks. And then there's only going to be one or two of the working class people on top. And they're like, right, that'll be us.
Yeah, exactly.
They were not saying
That's an entitlement.
all of the poor people will be on the top and all of the evil owners will be on the bottom. They were saying, once we flip it over, it resettles into a new pyramid with us on top.
That's right. Exactly. And that's that entitlement we were talking about previously. And of course that attracts psychopaths because they know that there's a gigantic opportunity there and they can create that chaos to flip the pyramid over and arrange things so that they end up on top of that pile. And this is how these things always go. The Bolshevik Revolution didn't create this new paradise society.
Quite
it
the
in
opposite.
fact made a very, very, very small, like hyper feudal society with a very small number of lords in the Communist Party.
You know what I describe it? Monopolization of power, centralization of power is bad. We have antitrust laws because we're like, this company got too big. Okay. Communism, socialism, and any kind of authoritarian government system skips the process by which power coalesces and just instantly snaps it all right to the center.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not good. That
Yeah.
creates problems.
And it turns out that the people it puts in charge are people who are good at accumulating power. They're not people who know how to do anything. They're just people who are good at accumulating power and maintaining power. Like I learned recently, I was talking with a woman she grew up in the Soviet Union, and her family was fortunate enough to survive, and it fell, and then they came to America in the 90s. And she was saying, do you know why they made us wait in bread lines? It wasn't because they could have set up more bread lines. It's like literally nobody had anything to do. It wasn't that. It was that if you waited 4 to 5 to 6 hours in line for your ability to eat dinner that night, you weren't doing anything else.
Right.
You couldn't go do something else.
I saw a really interesting meme. Someone posted about, I can't remember where I saw it. They posted about how when they were younger and in school, the teacher, they were doing a history lesson, and the teacher all of a sudden snapped at one of the students and accused them of breaking some rule they clearly did not break. Like, you were speaking loudly, go to the principal's office. And then when the student was like, no, I wasn't, the teacher said, does anybody else want to back him up? Anybody else want to put their name in that and go to the principal's office with him, defend him? And none of the kids said anything. And she goes, okay, pack your things, go.
See, that's why they say.
But as soon as he left, she said, I know he didn't do anything wrong, but none of you would actually call out the fact because the authority told you and you were scared.
I'm glad that she made that point, because that's why they say that the first person to stand up it does take courage, but they're not the one who has the most courage. It's the second person who stands up because they know what they're in for.
Yep.
That takes the most courage. And then once you get over that hump, the third person it takes less, the fourth person it takes less, and on and on and on. And that's how courage actually works.
In a lot of ways, that's how I feel about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I feel like she's a target for the swattings because she is the one introducing legislation. Like, she wants to declare James Revenge and Ruth Sent Us, which docks the addresses of the Supreme Court justices. She wants to have them declared a terrorist organization. This bill is not likely to pass. She does have co-sponsors, but it takes the people who are starting to make this part of their central platform. She is very brave, but we need more people to follow suit, and that takes a tremendous amount of courage.
I don't think you can, in the United States, declare an organization a terrorist organization.
She has a bill in Congress for it.
But I just think ultimately it just fails because it's a First Amendment issue. You can charge someone with terroristic acts, specific things, and which is what you would need to do. So she would need to file a referral to the DOJ on these people for the crimes committed. However, kind of pointless because the DOJ knows they're doing these things. And, I'll mention this too. There are similarities to what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene and what happened to us. There are some similarities. I'm not going to get into security because there's an active investigation in multiple jurisdictions. But it was the day after Marjorie Taylor Greene was here that we got swatted the first time. These people have not been brought to justice, but there are, as I mentioned, multiple jurisdictions looking into it. I've given several statements and evidence, so it may be moving forward. But we're going on now 7.5 months. It was January 6th when we got swatted. Now it seems like it may be the same person or a similar entity going after Marjorie Taylor Greene. Where is the DOJ? Are they unable? Because if they're unable, then we've got a very serious stability problem in this country if people can keep doing this.
Yeah, and people know that this is how this works. The people that game the system that you were talking about, they know how to game the system. They know that the system can drag things out, that they can drag their feet on whatever, and they can create that repressive situation where one side's strongly favored versus the other. by dragging it out when it's one side and not dragging it out, acting quickly when it's the other side.
The FBI would not investigate Hunter Biden, but they're jumping at the chance to go raid Trump's house.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. It's exactly right.
And right before the midterm, too. Like, we're not going to interfere in an election. Oh, the midterm's coming up? Raid Trump.
Yep, exactly.
Amazing. And now there's a lot of fears. There's been talk about whether or not Trump would be willing to announce his run right before because of what will happen with the Republican Party and the fact that he's been raided by the FBI. Will it make him look bad? And now there's questions being raised. I think Trump should just announce. I think we saw from the elections the other day that the GOP desperately needs Trump to be actively involved, and Trump should not wait. He should just come out and be like, "Yo, we're going to run and we're going to start endorsing people." I mean, he's been endorsing people, and his record is I'll say this: in 2018, Trump's endorsements were like 50-something%. In 2020, it was 70-something%. So far, right now, Trump's at like 99. Yeah. I think is it like 99% success?
It's over 90.
I think it's 99.
Yeah,
and so
it's high.
The suggestion is Republicans lost in 2018. Republicans made massive gains, upsetting what was projected in 2020. And with Trump's, endorsements this successful, people are thinking that's an indicator that Republicans are going to win. But we'll see, man. The Democrats, there was a swing district, New York 19. Was predicted to go Republican. It's an R+3 district. Democrat won. So I don't. People mentioned Myra Flores in Texas as like, oh, red wave's coming because a Republican won a Democrat district, and I'm like, dude, the whole thing's flipped over on its head. We don't know what's going to happen.
I think in some ways that's what the student loan debt reminds me of. Like, this is a bid from Biden's administration to be like, remember, Democrats are good. The Democrats give you things before midterms, and it's just not quite as successful as they want to be. I would think, and I'm not an expert in this, that if you really wanted to address the student loan debt problem, you'd make it easier to declare bankruptcy on student loans because it's almost impossible right now. And that is trapping people in debt that you wouldn't carry except for the fact that you are told you have to go to college to advance, to get a better career. It saddles them with debt immediately while pushing them down a path that is not giving them any financial success.
I think we should forgive interest on all the loans and apply any interest payments made directly to the principal, but you got to pay back the principal.
That's probably right.
You got money, you got to pay it. The system itself is predatory. And the first thing you got to do, here's step one. Here's the solution to the student debt crisis for all the left and the right fans out there. First, end the loan system. It's clearly predatory. All of the left clearly agrees, right? They tricked you into getting these loans. They're too expensive. You can't pay them back. All right, end it. Now, for everybody who's holding debt, interest payments, done. No more interest. Any payment you've made, that interest will be credited towards the principal. You got to pay back what you were given, but not the interest. This is the best part. People get their student loan forgiveness. If you got money, you got to pay it back. Now, if you paid more in interest than you borrowed, we apply that as a tax credit on your taxes for this year, and it rolls over until gone. So if you pay $10K in interest beyond the principal, then this year, that $10K goes towards what you would have paid in taxes. So it's a big win for all of these student debt forgiveness people, right? But if you were given $5,000 and you bought cheeseburgers and beer with it, and then you paid back half, we'll forgive the interest. And if there's still $1,000 left over, you got to pay that principal. But the first thing, ending the system of loans, seriously hinders the educational institutions, puts a big slowdown on that, and will help restore to only the people who truly can and want to go to college do. If you want to get a private loan, from a bank or something to go to college, that's fine. You can do that. But the way it's set up right now with these federalized loans and grants and things, no, get rid of all that.
I mean, the academic institutions are, and I'm sure we're all fine with this, but they're not going to come out well from this. And the reason that these loans are the way that they are is because the academic institutions got walked, not just that the students get walked down a primrose path if you have to go to college, if you want to get a good job, the whole thing. The institutions themselves did too. When the federal underwriting of student loans came in the 90s, they saw this gigantic opportunity to compete for students that they didn't have before. And this is when you saw this massive shift towards student services take place in the universities. So they're building rec centers, they're building bowling alleys, they're building movie theaters, they're building fancy new dorms. Like my dorm was like literally designed by a prison designer, and it was like 50 rooms for one bathroom. We all shared a shower. When the janitors got mad because one guy went to the bathroom in the heater in the bathroom, so he got pissed and he took away all of our shower curtains, so we all just had to shower here we are. It was like that was back in the day, man. Things were different back in the day. So they started building all these cool new dorms and all this other stuff, and they got massively in debt, hundreds of millions of dollars in mortgage debt. And so the strings, we're talking about the loans being given to the students, but there's massive loans that were given to the institutions too. And then they were using the loans being given to the students to try to pay off those debts themselves. Now what is happening? Those same financial institutions are playing this ESG game. The social part of ESG, that's environmental social governance, that's the S. And the governance is that you have to have the right people in places of power and offices and, say, diversity deans and things like that. If you want to have a good score, to have your finances managed by these exact same financial institutions, then what do you have to do? The same ones, by the way, you were going after with Occupy that were too big to fail. Turns out they learned that they were too big to fail and could do whatever they wanted because they got bailed out. Well, what are they doing? They're now saddling these universities with insane administrative bloat, so they can't possibly pay their debts either. So what we're seeing is a recreation of the company town, but the financial industry is the company, and basically every large institution is the town, and then people that have taken these student loans are just getting roped in for it.
I feel like the end result to all of this is not going to be what these woke people think.
No.
Obviously not. It's an absurd concept, but the end result is these big institutions that they're bloating are just going to crumble in on themselves.
They have to in the end. And you know, what would you do if you had, say, this huge institution like the entire financial system of the world that's likely to collapse in on itself, and it's leveraging everybody's pension funds to be able to do it? And so those are all going to be what's going to collapse. What would you work like hell to put in place if you could before the big collapse comes? Why not a gigantic social control system like surveillance and social credit systems and all of this to protect yourself so that you don't end up like swinging from a lamppost when everybody's really, really, really mad that you wrecked the whole world's economy?
They can't. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.